All right, so we want to welcome everybody who's attending today to the webinar titled Work from Home Ergonomic Strategies. I am Joe DeLucchi with Cal Insurance. COVID-19, of course, has been a major discussion point these last few weeks, and as such, Cal and our key strategic work comp safety and claim management partner, ESM, have been inundated with emails and phone calls. Because of the volume of inquiries, we thought it would be important to host this particular webinar for clients, referral partners, and friends. Within the presentation, you'll receive some excellent takeaway material that can be used immediately and will also be posted for download on Cal's website. So please go to www.mycalteam.com afterwards, and we will post this. Webinar is also being recorded and will also be posted on our blog in the next day or two in case you would like to share with others and review again. So let's go to slide 2. Sinead, you're already there. In the interest of keeping our talk today moving along, Sinead has everybody on mute, but we know that you're going to have some questions and some of them are going to be quite similar in nature. Please feel free to raise your hand at the bottom with a question. I think Sinead will look to chat with folks as hands get raised, and then also there is the Q&A box and the web chat box as well. So the 4 elements of today's show are presented here. It's going to be a work comp focus, certainly around safety focus and Cal OSHA compliance, which is a framework for risk management. And then of course, we're going to have the questions and answers. So let's go to slide 3. We decided to partner with ESM for our clients on the work comp claim and risk management side about a year ago, and we are certainly pleased with the relationship, and I know our clients as well have been very, very pleased with the attention and support they've gotten from ESM. Yes. So thank you, ESM. We're both referral-based organizations, so please do feel free to tell your fellow business leaders about us. At this point, I would like to introduce the team that's going to be presenting today. You're going to hear from Anthony Poston first. He is the CEO of ESM and has a real risk management background as respects work comp safety and Cal OSHA compliance. We also are going to hear today from Abe Jabon, who is a senior claims advocate. He grew up on the workers' comp adjuster side of the business, so he's intimately understanding of the work comp rules and all that's associated with that. And then Sinead as well is guiding us through this presentation today, and she's a customer success advocate for ESM. I know many have interacted with her as well. So with that, I want to turn it over to Anthony to get us started. Anthony, good morning.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Somehow of course, Murphy's Law, as soon as I try to go ahead and start presenting, my microphone dies. Can you hear me, everybody?
I can hear you.
I can hear you.
I can hear you.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, you're good to go.
Anthony, I think we've lost you. Abe, do you want to step in while Anthony is getting... Oh, Anthony, I think you're back online now.
Yeah, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Sorry about that. My microphone decided to wig out right as I'm about to present. And just so everybody knows, it is total Murphy's Law. Whenever you're trying to present something, especially from technology, it just goes kaput. So as long as you can hear me, great. I'll go ahead and get started. Thank you so much, Joe. We've got about a 40-minute presentation here. We're going to talk a lot about work from home ergonomic strategies. Abe is going to talk about some of the workers' compensation exposures related to work from home. So let's go ahead and get started, Sinead. Okay, here we have developed quite a few work from home ergonomic tools that we're going to be sharing after this presentation. First and foremost, with regards to ergonomics, there is a Cal OSHA standard, Title 8, California Code of Regulations, Standard 5110. And this policy on the left side, sorry, I'm looking at chat. Can everybody hear me? Is that okay? Okay. So our policy is going to help us comply with Cal OSHA standard in the upper left corner. We're going to provide that to you. And we also have provided this as a template where we have included an autofill for your company name. So you can simply just plug in your company name into one field and it will disperse throughout the whole policy. We've also developed the ergonomic slides that you're going to get today, and that's the presentation component of this webinar. If you move to the right, we've got a workstation ergonomics for employers program. It's about a 26-page module on how to create an ergonomic strategy, how to conduct ergonomic assessments, all the tools and forms you're going to need. And then on the far right side, we've got a remote work program. And this is, we just finished preparing this earlier this week, and it really goes through what employees' responsibilities are, what supervisors managing those work from home employees are required to do, and just some other tips and best practices. Down on the left, we've got a how to set up your ergonomic workstation training tip. You can see here just a one-page training tip, and then we've got a work from home wellness training that we shared at the last presentation on the exposure control plan. So if you didn't get that, we're going to be sharing that as well. And then we've got the ergonomic self-assessment quick check. This is a one-page ergonomic assessment you can provide to your employees. They can fill it out. If there are any no's within the ergonomic assessment, those are specific areas you can help the employee to troubleshoot. We've taken that same self-assessment and we've actually added it into a Google form. And I'll share more about the Google form here in just 1 second. All right, here is a work from home process that you can use to review with your team. And it starts with setting the policy. Once we've established the policy, right now we are in a work from home requirement. We're sheltered in place for most of us. So the voluntary versus mandatory is really more on the mandatory side. You might have some employees that are still in your office. They're probably providing essential services. But for those employees that are working from home, it is important to have a work from home policy and as well as a remote work ergonomic strategy. And so as we move to the right side here, employers are required to provide equipment to their employees. Now, within your own office, you probably have established a nice ergonomic program. You've got ergonomic tools from chairs to keyboards to mice and so forth. And the challenge right now is we were just immediately thrust into this remote work requirement. So some of our employers have allowed those employees to take their equipment home. So they've got tool screens, their ergonomic keyboard, their chairs and so forth. Some did not. I'm getting a lot of questions on whether or not the employer is responsible for purchasing equipment for those employees now that they're working at home. And I am saying no at this point because it is just a short-term, hopefully a short-term requirement. And once that moratorium lifts, now those employees are coming back to the office where you have more control of the ergonomic variables. So the question is, over the next 30 days, 60 days, however long this lasts, we want to make sure we provide employees with information about how to set up their ergonomic program and how to address any repetitive motion injury exposures. And we're going to talk about that here in upcoming slides. So as we move down to the middle here, employees get trained on those best practices. We want to make sure that they understand that their home is now their work site and it is now an extension of the employer's work site. So it's important that we try to control those repetitive motion exposures and other work comp variables, which Abe will talk about. We talked about the Google check, the Google form. One thing you can request is the employee takes a photo of their workstation and provide that to you so that you can evaluate whether or not their work from home environment is conducive to a comfortable setting. Abe's going to talk also about some of the carriers that are offering remote virtual ergonomic assessments and some of the applications that are available out there. And then we're going to talk about the bottom section here, which is leveraging technology. If you're using Microsoft Teams, which is relatively new to Microsoft, but that has been expanded dramatically. And then also Slack or Zoom or GoToMeeting or any other online application that you're using to communicate with your organization. We're going to talk about some best practices with that. And then just the last few tiles there, maintain communication with your employees. Maybe set up a virtual lunch, maybe a virtual happy hour or a power hour where you're discussing new ideas and strategies. So take this time to really connect online. We are required to be socially distant from everyone, but it doesn't mean we can't socially connect online. And then once this moratorium lifts, we're going to be bringing employees back to work. And that is one of the big questions we're getting asked, and we're trying to help employers, is that once this moratorium lifts, are they going to continue to remain in their office, or are they going to downsize? And then if productivity has remained the same through this work from home process, they might be allowing employees to work from home more consistently. Go ahead, Sinead. So let's get started with the ergonomics program. Like with any CalOSHA safety program, or any safety program in general, whether it's best practice or it's a compliance requirement, first we want to establish what the policy is. We want to make sure that policy matches our organization's processes and our procedures. Once we finalize that policy, maybe it's the safety manager that's finalizing it. If you don't have a safety committee, it might be one person, or you might have a safety committee that's putting together all the nuts and bolts to that policy. Once we've established that, we're going to roll it out to the managers and supervisors, make sure that they understand their requirements. And then we're going to train the employees on what that policy is. So from an ergonomic standpoint, it's making sure that we establish a good ergonomic setup at our home workstation. And so we'll talk about some best practices for that here just in a few slides. So we provided the training, and one of those training tips and one of those requirements could be that ergonomic quick check I mentioned. Once they complete that, it comes back to you. If you're using a Google form, there's an electronic signature. Even if they send it back via email, you've got the email signature, and that's going to be part of your record-keeping process to satisfy your injury and illness prevention program. So we've set the policy, we provided the training, we've rolled out the tools, and now we're getting information back from a record-keeping standpoint. So that is really the IIPP in a nutshell. So we'll talk more about the specifics here coming up. So with regards to Title 8 California Code of Regulations 5110, repetitive motion injuries, there are three key requirements that an employer has to satisfy. First is the worksite evaluation. Again, I mentioned it's a lot easier to evaluate your workstation at your office because it's fixed. You can control those variables. The challenge is going to be, now that we have all these tentacles going out to our employees' home environment, how do we control those variables? And so again, we want to provide information to those employees so that they are aware of how to manage this new repetitive motion exposure, which is the second element. How do we control those exposures of RMIs? And then the third component is training. So providing ergonomic training, allowing the employees to understand what repetitive motion injuries are, what symptoms and consequences might be from having RMIs, and then reporting any potential exposure through the normal course of your operations. Report it to the supervisor, report it to HR, report it to the safety manager, so that those support systems can kick in and help that employee mitigate that potential exposure before it becomes a workers' compensation case. Excuse me. So we're going to talk more about all of that here coming up in these next few slides. So let's talk about what are ergonomics. Let's look at some different definitions. There's four here that are primarily used just in workers' compensation and safety. Ergonomic stressors, which could be poor workplace designs, increased repetition or force, or extreme postures that could result in an awkward position, which results in a repetitive motion injury. And I can tell you from experience, I had a very uncomfortable chair that I wasn't even aware of. And my elbow, my right elbow, the one I use to rest on my armrest to use my mouse, over a few months, started to really become extremely painful. And so I ended up getting tennis elbow. And if anybody's ever had that, it is very painful. It takes a while for it to develop, and then it takes a while for it to heal. And so over the course of that process, about 6 months, I had trouble sleeping. I couldn't hold my kids. It is extremely painful. So we want to recognize some of those ergonomic stressors before they turn into tennis elbow, for example. Musculoskeletal disorders, MSDs, repetitive motion injuries, we're going to focus more on the RMIs as well as the CTDs, which is cumulative trauma disorders. And the CTDs are exactly what I mentioned, tennis elbow, tendonitis, and so forth. And that develops over time through that repetitive motion exposure. So having an awkward posture can lead to the RMI, which can lead to a CTD. Okay, repetitive motion injury exposure. So I just talked briefly about these. These are specific types of exposures that can result in a ergonomic injury or a CTD. I'll talk about mechanical stress points. The pinch point that I mentioned on my elbow, resting it on my chair. Pinch points also can include resting your wrists on a sharp edge, cuts off the circulation, puts pressure on those tendons. Those become inflamed and they become very painful. But again, that doesn't just happen over time. I call ergonomic injuries the sleeper injuries because they take a while to develop. It's not like you have something fall on your foot and you have a broken toe, or you trip and fall and you sprain your wrist. That is an immediate transaction. Repetitive motion injuries are exactly how they're defined. Repetitive motion, and over time they develop into a very painful injury. And they're very costly from an ergonomic standpoint as well. Some other exposures: poor workstation design. I'm sure a lot of our employees right now have scrambled to put together their own workstation at home. They might not have had an office at home. They might not have worked from home before, so they're using dining room tables. They're sitting on their couch, the coffee tables. They're trying to find places to work. At the same time, trying to manage the kids that are at home and all those other noise levels that are really just inundating them on a daily basis. So there are a lot of new variables and exposures now within the work-home environment. And again, that is an extension of an employer's work site. So we need to provide those tools to the employees, make sure that they're aware of the exposures, and then stay in constant communication with them to help manage that while we are in this shelter-in-place requirement. Go ahead, Shane. So within the ergonomic program, I took this straight from the ergonomic policy. These are specific responsibilities for each of these different levels, from safety manager to department managers to supervisors to affected employees. And although when we set a policy, it goes from the top down, we train our managers, train our supervisors, who then hold our employees accountable. We also want feedback from the employees. So when the employees are, maybe they've developed a better best practice while sitting at their dining room table. They found a pillow that they put on their chair, or they found a new chair. Any type of best practice we can create during this time, share that with the organization so that other employees can learn from some of those best practices, and they can accommodate themselves, again, while they're working from home during this, hopefully 30 days or less, maybe 60 days is what we're hearing. So take this policy, review the different components of it, look at the different responsibilities, and again, modify that to fit your organization. So this whole program, this library of tools, is just a framework. It's not a one-size-fits-all, but you can use that to take it home or take it back to your office, review it with your team, and then adopt some of those best practices and then roll them out. Here's some other worksite analysis methods. I've talked about most of these during this presentation already. RMI identification through ergonomic assessments, quick checks, the workstation evaluation as well. Direct observation. Have a video conference with your employee and review their workstation, maybe come up with some best practices together. I mentioned some of the carriers are doing virtual assessments as well, but those are really more towards ergonomic injuries that have been filed. So we don't see them as much being proactive. We do have a partner who I've been talking to who does do ergonomic evaluations. She hasn't set up a remote capability yet, but she's looking at doing that. So, we're all trying to solve problems in a very quick manner because we have all of these new exposures and people need information. So we have developed a lot of these tools for you. Again, take them, modify them, adopt them, roll them out, and then continue to maintain monitoring of all of those implementation strategies. And that's where I talk about evaluation of worker capability. So evaluate the worker versus the workstation, and can we adjust the workstation to fit the worker and not the worker to the workstation? Because when you do the latter, that's typically when you start to develop those repetitive motion exposures that can lead to an injury. Here's some other general employer work from home strategies. Develop a company Slack channel. We'll talk more about Slack and Teams in just a second. As I mentioned, virtual lunches by department, creating some one-on-ones with video. Joe and I and our teams have been doing a lot more video conferencing, and I've been doing that with a lot more of our clients now. And so I think it's been beneficial overall. I've gotten to know people a little bit better. We've developed, I think, deeper relationships because we're all trying to solve very similar problems. So we're sharing a lot of those best practices. And just by doing video calls, you just get to see people, so you have that social connection, although you might not be in the same vicinity, same location, same city, same state. But again, having those video calls helps keep people engaged. Conducting those ergonomic evaluations, as I mentioned, and then there might be some additional benefits from tax write-offs for home environments. So I think the tax code is probably going to change pretty dramatically here, at least in the short term, while we're trying to make all these accommodations, especially with the new stimulus bill and some of these payroll relief offers from the Small Business Loan Administration. So a lot of things are going to change over the next 30 days, both health for Americans, new benefits for Americans, And so my big thing is I'm just trying to keep my chin up and look at this as a very small blip on the whole timeline of life. But at the very same, it is a very difficult challenge that we're all going through. So I encourage all of us to come together as a community and make recommendations and share best practices so that we can learn from each other, so that we can keep our employees and our community safe. Here's the ergonomic quick check I mentioned. So you can see on the left side, it's a one-page checklist that goes through posture, keyboard, mouse, best practices, how to adjust your ergonomic chair, how to align your computer screens. Typically, you want about an arm's distance away. Work techniques, just good best practices overall. And then lighting. Lighting can be a big factor, especially if you have an office and a bedroom now and you've got that either backlighting from the window behind you or in front of you. But we've taken this quick check and we put it into a Google form. And if you haven't used Google Forms before, it's free. At the bottom of the screen, it kind of looks like it's cut off here, but we have a link to our example, which you can see our logo there. But you can quickly take this quick checklist on the left side, which is a Word document, copy and paste the questions into the Google form, and then you can create a simple workflow where those employees take the ergonomic quick check. It reports back to you all the information, and you can see on the right side, it provides you with analytics. So you're looking for any no's on the checklist, and those no's would be a specific area of concern that you can then talk to the employee about what some of those challenges are. Maybe it's the chair, maybe they're working off a laptop and they don't have dual monitors, so they're hunched over. But either way, you're getting information back from the employee, and then you can help them troubleshoot it before they develop that RMI. And if you need any help with Google Forms, please let us know. We've used them a lot. They're great for surveys. So if you have any trouble accessing those, just type in Google Form or search for Google Form on Google. You'll come up to forums, and then it's pretty user-friendly. But if you have any questions, please let us know. I mentioned Teams, Zoom, Slack, GoToMeeting. There's all types of tools out there right now. These are probably the most common ones. I'm getting a lot of questions about whether Zoom or GoToMeeting is better. I think Zoom is more widely used right now. 2 weeks ago, they had 400,000 downloads when everybody started working from home. I needed to buy a new webcam. I couldn't even find a webcam. So I think Zoom is kind of the new 800-pound gorilla. But GoToMeeting, GoToWebinar, those have been around for a while. They're a very established platform. They are able to scale up pretty quickly because they're such a large organization. Zoom is relatively new, but they are a publicly traded company now, so they have the funding to increase their capacity and infrastructure. If you haven't used Slack before, Joe and Cal, they do have a Slack channel related to COVID-19. We're sharing information on that, so I encourage you to sign up. Great way to connect with other Cal customers, as well as the Cal team and the ESM team. So we'll continue to use that to share information. That is more of an externally used application, so you can connect people outside of your own office location. Teams we're using more for internal. It's part of the Office 365 suite. Teams is very similar to Slack in that you can create channels for your organization or channels by department. And then you can share information within those.
And that's how Cal's doing it as well. With the Microsoft Teams in particular, really it starts with us, leaders of the organization, to really drive it. I've found that, people are not going to participate as much unless we really kick this off. But it has been two different items that have been really helpful for our organization. I definitely encourage every organization to check it out.
Yeah, right now, the best thing we can do is share information. Share best practices, learn from each other so that we can all mitigate this together. Go ahead, Sinead. This is a rather busy slide, but these are employee work from home tips and tactics. We've also provided a work from home wellness training tool that you can share with your employees. One thing that we are getting a lot of questions about is technology. So we talked about the apps that are available, but also take a look at what your internet speeds are. And because we have kids that are home, you have numerous devices that are accessing the internet, which is really crunching the capacity. So make sure that you have the appropriate speeds within your internet so that you can share these informations and utilize all these different applications. Most importantly, over-communicate. Encourage employees to offer best practices. Share information through your Slack channels or your Teams channels. If possible, try to create a dedicated workspace have your employees create that dedicated workspace because it does provide some privacy while they're conducting business. But just knowing that kids are around, there's just a lot more variables to manage. So we're trying to be as flexible as possible with our team to say, we get it. Let's try to do the best we can to continue to have some best business practices in place. So here's just some other recommendations that you can discuss with your team. Again, over communicate right now, I think, is probably the most important thing. Keeping in contact with everybody to share that information. It's just going to help us shelter in place and help mitigate this overall exposure. The CDC rolled out these new best practices for disinfecting your home if someone is COVID-19 sick. We do expect the numbers to spike in April, hopefully just over the next 2 weeks, and then we round the corner and we start to see a decrease in net new cases. But if you do have somebody that is sick at home, here are some best practices to mitigate and disinfect that environment so that we don't continue the spread. There's part 1 here. I just added this in big text so you can read it. And then Sinead, if you go to part 2, here is the second part to that. You can also go to the cdc.gov website down there at the bottom, and that will provide you with some additional best practices on how to decontaminate and disinfect your home environment if somebody is sick, or even your work environment. So Joe and I have met with a remediation company, and we know it's very expensive to try to disinfect and decontaminate an office environment. So best thing we can do, shelter in place, not bring that exposure in so that we don't have to go through that expensive process. And again, here's some tools for you to help do that. All right, let me turn it over to Abe. Abe's going to talk about workers' comp exposures related to work from home.
Thanks, Anthony. You can hear me?
Yes.
No, Murphy's Law hasn't continued? All right. Thank you. All right. So we have the carrier ergonomic resources. We'll put this up there as a few examples as how much there is available from all the different carriers. I used to work at Berkshire Hathaway, so I know firsthand that they have a proprietary ergonomic app in-house that's available to most of their customers for free, as well as really robust platforms on the topic. So just something to keep a lookout for, and this is really a good time to reach out to them to see what kind of resources they're providing, especially as it relates to COVID-19 as well. That really brings us to the next topic. Working from home, there's issues that are going to arise, and what happens when somebody is actually injured while they're at home, but they also work from home. So, when does that accident fall under the umbrella of workers' compensation? There's really a two-pronged test, and this is for every claim, not whether or not they work from home, but any time that there's a potentially compensable injury. So it has to arise out of and in the course of employment. So it's AOE, COE. It's something that you'll hear a lot in the workers' compensation domain, not so much on the HR side, but something to consider. And what that boils down to is, did this occur because of work? You notice that there's no location requirement. So when someone is now working from home, all the hazards that were in their home previously now become work hazards. And it's something that you don't really have as much control over as an employer. In your corporate office, you can have certain conduct or certain facility requirements that prevent this type of thing. So an example that we have up here is tripping over a dog. If I'm talking to a client over the phone and I happen to trip over a dog, that's almost certainly going to be a work comp injury with very rare exception. It doesn't seem like it should be, but that's going to arise out of the scope of employment. Now that they're at home, those hazards at home become work hazards. So it's something to keep in mind. And it also extends this legal doctrine called the personal comfort doctrine. This is something like, let's say we're in a corporate office and we go to the bathroom. We go grab a cup of coffee. Well, if you go do those things, you're still at work. And those personal comforts are still considered under the scope of workers' compensation. The same thing applies at home. So if I, after this webinar is over today and I go grab a cup of coffee, it's not necessarily work related. You could argue that, but it still falls under this personal comfort doctrine. So it's still going to be work-related. Now, the point of this isn't for you to decide whether or not something sounds like it's not work-related or work-related. It's really to make sure that you're documenting any alleged injuries, and so that you can send as much information over to the carrier as possible so they can make their determination. And that really brings us to the next topic, is reporting and resources. And this might not be something that you think of, but I want you to think of an employee that's working from home, somebody that's not in HR and they injure themselves right now. They're working from home and they fall, okay? And they're doing something maybe related to work, maybe they're talking on a phone with a client, maybe they're on a conference call, whatever it is. Do they have the resources to make sure that they're going to the right treatment center? Do they know, who's in the MPN? Do they know who to call? Do they know how to report this claim? Do they have all the posting notices that they would have had at the corporate site? So if not, make sure that they have those things. Email them the DWC-7 in California. If they're alleging a work-related injury, DWC-1, make sure that they know who to call. That's the most important thing. Obviously, if it's an emergency, don't worry about medical provider network. You get them in an ambulance, call 911, but they should have those resources just as they would as if they were in the office. So something to consider. Jumping to the next part. So these are some considerations outside the scope of workers' compensation. So while we're implementing these new procedures and policies, we really have to think about the other implications. So these aren't things that we're necessarily advising on, and it's also not all encompassing, but they're definitely things that you want to take a look at with the relevant professional. For example, tax implications that Anthony previously discussed. There may be some credits or something related to COVID-19 that you want to keep separate on the expense line. Something that you'll want to talk to a tax professional about if that arises in your company. HR policies, same thing. If you don't have a work from home policy, and probably many companies don't, they're just implementing this now, you want to make sure you hammer that out, what the expectations are, how someone punches in, punches out, how are you making sure they're taking their breaks on time. In insurance coverage, even outside the scope of workers' comp, we were talking about yesterday, business interruption. Does that apply to COVID-19? They're litigating it now, so we don't even know the answer, but we'll find out. So those things that might affect your business, you want to make sure that you're covered, or if there's anything in your policy that may exclude you. And that goes to sick leave, PTO. These are evolving every day. We're seeing new federal laws. We're seeing overlapping state laws. So you want to make sure, wherever the employees are working from, you make sure that you're abiding by those jurisdictional requirements. And these are evolving. So, it's definitely something that you want to loop in your labor attorney about or ask a professional, but something that should be on your radar for sure. Lastly, Anthony also discussed cybersecurity and some of the tools for the home office. You just want to make sure that the employees have the tools that they need. Some employees may not have high-speed internet. You might have to work with them in the meantime. What tools are you going to be providing? If this is a short-term thing, then you may not have to worry about it. But if this is gonna get extended indefinitely, these are things you want to make sure that you're adhering to. And if somebody has a disability, abiding by the ADA. So just considerations. Make sure you talk to a labor attorney, tax professional, and review your HR policies. And that brings us really to the recommendations. We did mention these, but just to hammer it home, when you're having people work from home, you want to have a policy that discusses and covers eligibility, safety equipment, security, what they need to do in the event of an injury. Make sure that they're signing a work agreement. Right now we're kind of forced into this, but if you decide to extend this into the future, you want to make sure you're outlining what the expectations are for the employee. You want to make sure they have access to all the resources that they need for workers' compensation, legal and otherwise. Maintain communication with them. Make sure that you're reaching out so that they feel comfortable and they know what they need to be doing on a daily basis and who to talk to if they don't. And the last one, I just wanted to say one last thing, just hammer home, everything that we say in here is with a caveat. Make sure you talk to the professionals, the appropriate professionals with this. These aren't necessarily recommendations that are binding. Just make sure they mold to your own business needs. So with that, I'll kick it back to you, Anthony. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Ed. You touched on a really good point, security. So while many of us have really good data security plans, it's something that I didn't add into the company policies to review, but something you should review. One thing in particular is if an employee is using their work equipment now at home, that they only use it for work use, not personal use. We do have that in our remote work program overview. So those are some policies that you want to review, because an employee using their own personal computer might click on some phishing scam, which there are an extensive number and growing related to COVID right now. So make sure that your computers have the appropriate data security on there, that's tested. We, for example, use Cylance, and I'm constantly testing the dashboard to see if there's any known infections. So just because we are now in these new environments, we want to make sure that we do provide appropriate tools to the employees to protect their security. Joe, do you have anything on that? I know you're probably dealing with some general data security.
Yeah, no, I mean,
concerns.
this is definitely something that's near and dear to our heart here with the amount of sensitive data that we control. And so we have an outstanding IT consultancy partner we've been working with for a couple of years now for both on-site and then remote employees as well. So if you have not contacted and discussed the game plan with your IT consultant yet, I encourage you to do so today. It really is important because there are a lot of these cyber scams going on right now, unfortunately.
Here's some other policies that you can do review. If you don't have a work from home policy, make sure that you get one in place. Review that with your employment law attorney just to make sure that all the boxes are checked. Again, hopefully this is only a short-term issue, but nevertheless, we do have this extended work site now. So all of those benefits and coverages from workers' comp extend to the employees. So we want to make sure that they are equipped with managing the safety within their own environment. Travel and mileage policy, obviously traveling is down tremendously. And then those whole work comp reporting procedures, as Abe mentioned, make sure that the employees still understand how to report claims. They should probably be well aware of those processes, but this is a good time to reinforce those messages. Just continue to reiterate them, because now that they're working remote, they're not there in your office. It's harder to have those conversations. So leverage technology, put the policies in place, and continually communicate with them. And with that, Joe, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Anthony. And there was also a question that was asked about if a person trips over their dog while working at home, is that covered under workers' compensation? I would say yes, most likely it is covered under workers' compensation. Certainly if a client called me and asked what they should be doing, we would be sending them the workers' compensation reporting forms to be completed. Then we would tell them that they definitely need to send this to the workers' compensation carrier, include us on that correspondence. It would be hard for me to believe that the workers' comp carrier would deny such a claim. I would imagine it would be covered. A couple of other items, just very quick here. As Anthony mentioned, over communicate. That is something that we are doing as well at Cal here. We all have different pods, so we're doing daily Zoom check-ins, and we're also on Microsoft Teams for the various correspondences we had talked about. One other item on the resources too, we will have up on the Cal website, and ESM will have it as well, the downloadable items for the work from home ergonomic tools. That was slide number 4, a really important slide for everybody on this webinar, and then everybody who'll be watching it afterwards. So at this point, Anthony or Abe, unless you have anything further you want to mention, I want to thank you both for your time and availability this morning on the webinar.
Thank you, Joe. I hope everybody stays safe, both you and your families. So we'll get through this. We are American and we are optimistic. That is for sure. So hopefully just the next 30 days are the only issues that we have to deal with. So good luck, everybody.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Joe.
everybody,
Thanks,
for your
everyone.
attendance today. Take care. Have a great rest of your day. Bye now.